The spring night was soft over Washington. Lee had surrendered at Appomattox 5 days before. On April 14, 1865, Good Friday, Abraham Lincoln dressed slowly in the White House, pulled on white kid gloves, and agreed to be seen at ease. Mary had tickets for Ford's Theater, a comedy called Our American Cousin. The president would sit in a flag-draped box and laugh with his wife. After 4 years of war, laughter could feel like policy. Outside, a different resolve gathered. John Wilkes Booth, a celebrated actor with a talent for entrances, had traded his applause for conspiracy. His plan to kidnap the president had wilted with the spring. The war had ended too quickly for grand schemes. Now he plotted murder. 3 murders. Booth would kill Lincoln at the theater. Lewis Powell would cut down Secretary of State William H. Seward in his bed. George Atzerodt would shoot Vice President Andrew Johnson in his hotel. If the Union's head could not be severed on the battlefield, Booth meant to sever it in the Capitol. Before 8:30, the Lincolns climbed into an open carriage with Major Henry Rathbone and his fiancée, Clara Harris. They rolled down Pennsylvania Avenue, past lamps haloed with mist and crowds calling out blessings. At Ford's, the house was packed. The play had already begun. When the president entered, the orchestra struck "Hail to the Chief," the actors stilled, and 1,500 people rose as one body. Lincoln bowed, his gaunt face lit by gaslight and goodwill, and took his seat in the state box decorated with flags, a red, white, and blue balcony above the stage. Booth knew the building the way a sailor knows a ship. He had chosen the moment well. The biggest laugh line in the play, "You sockdologizing old man-trap," would cover a pistol's crack. He left his horse with a stable boy in the alley, slipped through the stage door, nodded to men who knew him by fame alone, and climbed the narrow stair to the dress circle. At the box door, he wedged a walking stick to jam the latch, then stepped through the inner curtain as if answering a cue. Inside the box, the world had relaxed. Lincoln leaned forward, long legs crossed. Mary turned to share a remark. Rathbone watched the stage through the haze of gas flames. Booth raised a small derringer and fired into the back of Lincoln's head. The sound was soft. For a heartbeat, the crowd mistook it for the play. Rathbone lunged. Booth slashed him with a hunting knife and vaulted the rail. His spur tangled in a flag. He crashed to the stage and broke his left leg. He rose, shouted. Witnesses heard either "Sic Semper Tyrannis" or "The South is avenged," and limped into the alley. Up in the box, Clara caught Rathbone's bleeding arm while Mary screamed and clutched her husband's shoulders. Lincoln had not moved. Dr. Charles Leal, a young Army surgeon in the audience, forced his way through the crowd, cut the president's collar, and found the fatal path with his finger. He could not save Lincoln. He could only keep him breathing. The doctors decided not to move their patient back to the White House. The jolting carriage would kill him sooner. Instead, soldiers and civilians carried the wounded man across 10th Street to the Petersen boarding house, laying him diagonally on a bed too short for his frame. Soldiers cleared the theater aisle, tore up a door to use as a stretcher, and the crowd parted as if a tide were drawing a single body to shore. The room filled and hushed. Cabinet members arrived in torn collars. Men wept who had never cried in public. Outside, word ran along sidewalks like water. The president has been shot. Gas lamps flickered in windows. Prayer gathered in clusters. Across town at Seward's home, Powell had already hacked through guards and cut the secretary's face and throat. A metal brace on Seward's jaw, set after a carriage accident, deflected the blade and spared his life. Atzerodt, assigned to Johnson, lost his nerve and fled to drink. The plot had been grand and had collapsed into one terrible success. At the Petersen House, the hours slowed to the rate of Lincoln's breath. Robert stood at the foot of the bed. Mary could not bear the scene and moved between room and hall. Outside, rumor piled on fact. Some said Booth was caught. Others swore he had ridden for Maryland. In the crowded bedroom, the president's chest rose and fell as dawn coated the window. Pale. Booth had indeed crossed the Navy Yard bridge. He rode hard into Maryland with David Harold at his heels and found Samuel Mudd, a country doctor who set the broken leg and gave him a crutch. They moved through swamps and tobacco fields, sleeping in thickets and barns, until they reached Richard Garrett's farm on the Virginia side of the Potomac. There, cornered in a tobacco barn on the night of April 25th to 26th, Booth refused to surrender. Soldiers lit the straw. Boston Corbett, a sergeant peering through the slats, fired once. Dragged out onto the grass, Booth asked only that his hands be lifted where he could see them. They were. He whispered, "Useless, useless," and was gone. Back in Washington, the watch never left Lincoln's face. At 7:22 and 10 seconds on the morning of April 15th, his breathing ceased. Secretary of War Edwin Stanton, who had stood near all night, broke the silence. Some heard, "Now he belongs to the ages." Others insisted he said angels. Either word fits the hush that followed. The Civil War had ended without a final, formal battle, but its last casualty had been taken under a theater's chandelier. The country swaddled its grief in ritual. Black crape veiled the White House. The coffin lay in state in the East Room, then under the Capitol dome on a simple pine catafalque. A funeral train set out for Springfield, city to city. At night, it looked like a lantern sliding across the map. In Philadelphia, mourners filed past in tens of thousands. In New York, black horses pulled him down Broadway. In small towns, mothers lifted children so they could remember they had seen the train. Mary Lincoln, shattered, withdrew from the pageant and into a room where memory had to be met minute by minute. Robert shouldered duty colder than mourning, settling affairs, thanking cities, arranging trials. The surviving conspirators, Harold Atzerodt Powell and Mary Surratt, faced a military commission. Gallows rose in a yard at the arsenal. The hangings came that July. History later argued their fairness. The moment demanded theater. What remained after the train and the scaffold was a vacancy large enough to change policy. Lincoln had imagined a binding peace, malice toward none, charity for all. Without him, Reconstruction veered. Extremes took turns at the wheel. Rights were written and then clawed away. The balcony in Ford's Theater stayed empty for years, as if the city were saving the seat. Stand at 10th Street today. The distance is a single crosswalk, from Ford's shadowed proscenium to the Petersen House's narrow doorway. The box is restored, flags drooping soft as sighs. The bed remains in a room almost too small to hold the night that ended there. If you listen, you can hear a laugh line, a soft pop, a cry, and then the long quiet of a country learning that the war's last shot was fired at a man who only wished, at last, to sit beside his wife and laugh. Thank you for listening to Last Post History. Subscribe for more true stories from the world at war.